We will go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Tara McHugh. I'm the Executive Director at the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council. Just wanted to give you a little bit of background about why we're here today. The ECF RPC received funding from the EDA to help advance resilience, especially business resilience and economic resilience in our region. So this webinar and this training is funded through the EDA in partnership with Volusia County and business survival partners. For a little bit of background about who the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council is, there are 10 RPCs across the state of Florida. We are authorized through state statute, and we provide a variety of services to our partners across our 8 county regions from economic development, community development, and emergency preparedness. We were established in 1962, so this is our 60th anniversary, and so we're thankful that you are able to join us today for this training. As local businesses in our region, you are the lifeline to our communities, especially before, during, and after a disaster. The community, not only from a perspective of helping the community get back, to bounce back and provide a variety of services to help move forward normalcy in your community, but also providing the jobs and services necessary for our community. So if you are unable to get up and running quickly, not only is your lifeline impacted, but also that of your employees. It's Monday morning, thank you. So we wanted to make sure that you are provided the variety of opportunities in order to learn about how you can be better prepared for a disaster, whether or not it's a natural disaster or a human-induced disruption. So for that reason, we have asked Robert Preininger from Business Survival Partners to provide this training today for you. So in just a couple minutes, he will take over for us, but I also wanted to welcome Councilmember Wheeler and hand it over to her to welcome you on behalf of the county.
Thank you, Tara. I'm really glad to be here. This is a real passion with mine. So good morning, everyone. So on behalf of the Volusia County Council and the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council, I'm pleased to welcome you today and thank you for taking the time to make your businesses more resilient. Resiliency is quite the buzzword today, but many don't understand exactly what it means. Resiliency is the ability to recover quickly after any stressor or shock. In this neck of the woods, those stressors are usually in the forms of tropical storms, tornadoes, hurricanes, and although we have seen our share of wildfires as well. Fortunately, we have not experienced the big one that destroys our infrastructure and the way of life. But we don't want to become complacent. If your small business experiences any type of major disaster, the estimate is around 40% that you will go out of business within a year. Businesses that have a strong resiliency plan will have a greater chance of survival. As we all know, businesses are the backbone of our local economy. For a community to recover from a major disaster, it's critical that the local economy gets back on its feet as soon as possible. Even when there is no power and the roads are blocked, the community relies on you to bounce back quickly and provide the necessary goods and services to get us through those troubled times. Your business provides the sense of normalcy we need after disaster. We're really excited about today's workshop. It's going to help you create a resiliency plan to overcome whatever stressors come our way. We'll help you create a plan that is unique to your business and that also focuses on the needs of your employees. The more resilient you are after a disaster, the quicker you will be able to resume your business and the stronger our community will become. So thank you again for taking the time to join us for this really important workshop. And Tara, I guess you want me to go ahead and introduce Aubrey Austin, which is, will have a Volusia County's emergency management perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Wheeler. Aubrey?
Good morning. Is everyone can hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Perfect. Good morning.
Yes.
Like Councilman Wheeler said, my name is Aubrey Austin. I work for Volusia County Emergency Management. Here, I'm a planner. And we're going to talk a little bit about continuity of government and continuity of operations, and then how that relates to business continuity to make sure our whole community is resilient. One of the things we wanted to start with is Councilwoman Wheeler talked about some of our hazards that we do have. We talk a lot about tropical storms, hurricanes, tornadoes. We've had our share of wildfires indeed. But some of the other threats that we don't talk about as much is going to be like sinkholes or civil disturbance or things like cyber attacks, which unfortunately seems to be the highest rate hazard these days, because that's what's happening most frequently. But we've got coastal erosion and droughts and floods and all types of incidents that can actually happen and disrupt business in our community lifelines. For us at our EOC, we have been activated 37 times, either partial or full, over the last 10 years. Some of them are going to be things like the Daytona 500 or the Coke Zero 400, but we look at it like this is going to be a mass gathering. And if anyone wanted to create any harm, that seems we have the most people in one location, it could happen at that given time. We've also had to activate for Tropical Storm Elsa or Hurricane Matthew. We look at things like when we have the mass events at the Speedway that aren't necessarily the race, but we have some country 500 events or some Rockville events. So we look at those as well to make sure that we are giving the best opportunity to prepare and respond for our community. Ultimately, we have roughly 92 plans in place to look at response, recovery, continuity of operations, our hazard-specific plans, our EOC Emergency Operations Center plans. We've got all these plans in place, and it's not just for Volusia County Emergency Management, it's actually for everybody, all the departments, the jurisdictions, the businesses, houses of worship, the school systems. We try to actually include the whole community to make sure that everyone is prepared and everyone's ready to respond and everyone's ready to recover together. We do this on an annual basis. We look at our plans. As threats, knowledge, and experience grow, plans must be reviewed and updated. So we look at these and touch these probably at least once a year. Some of them aren't as frequent because things aren't necessarily changing in that area. But as we go through and we look through all of our plans, we want to make sure that we're ready for whatever happens to build that resilience. When we do get activated, hopefully everyone can see, it's kind of small print, and I apologize, it's just a large chart. When we do get activated, this is what our operations center structure looks like. You can see we do a lot of planning. We look at logistics, our public safety services, our human services, and those are going to be our emergency support functions that come in and actually handle a lot of the boots on the ground work. You can see in the planning section, you might not be able to see, but I can see and I'll tell you. We have business and industry under ESF 18. We have them under planning and logistics. And the idea behind that is to make sure that they're part of the planning process, make sure that they have all the information needed so that they can respond adequately, and then they have the opportunity to recover quickly. But then we also have them in the logistics section, is because there's nothing better than businesses helping businesses. So there might be a major event that happens, and a lot of our small businesses might need a little bit of assistance, whether it be some planning components, whether it be some type of resource that has to do with maybe we have a large scale property owner that is in the business industry, or maybe it's the agriculture industry, who needs help from lawn maintenance, or whether it be picking up debris. And yes, the county does offer debris pickup, but it might not be quick enough because we have such a large county. There might be some small businesses around the county that can help them quicker. It's just getting them together, having them talk, building that relationship, and making sure they have that connection so that we can build a quicker recovery system for our community. But at the top of our org chart, you can see that we're not alone. If you look, we have the county manager, we've got all of public protection, we've got all of the cities, we've got technical liaisons. We truly try to keep everyone incorporated to make sure that the information, the planning, everyone knows what's going on all the time, and that we all actually are working together. For continuity of operations, Volusia County government does have a continuity of government plan and a continuity of operations plan. The continuity of operations plan actually is going to go to I'm going to call it the department or division levels across the municipalities and across a variety of other partners that we have. But we're looking at continuing our vision, continuing our mission, making sure we're doing the things that we told the citizens and the public and the community that we're going to be able to do. Our lines of succession, direction and control, personnel coordination, and it doesn't happen quickly. We do some things where we have to mobilize some areas of it, and it might be that we have to work on certain levels first to make sure that our line of succession is in order, making sure that direction's there, and then look at our alternate facilities, making sure that all the right people are in the right places so that if we ever have to leave the emergency operations center, we have people that know exactly what to do. We've got checklists for everybody, and it's a smooth transition. We want to look at things like our critical missions. What are we supposed to do? What do we have to do to keep our community up and functional? We look at our vital records and databases, and clearly without our information technology folks, software backup, cloud services, reliability, we do a lot with the private sector. Government is not the end all be all when it comes to technology. Private sector pretty much is, I'm not gonna say in charge, but ultimately responsible for keeping those things connected. And then we always do training, exercising, and making sure that people are always up to speed of what's going on. Continuity of government is a little bit higher. We're going to look at the leadership of the county and making sure that that the council members always know what's going on, the chair, the county manager, the deputy county manager, the county attorney, making sure they're all on the same page, making sure that we always have a plan so that leadership is it's sustainable. We always have to make sure that we have leadership to give us that guidance to make sure we are completing our missions and what our visions look like. We might need to create them an alternate meeting location because of if a lot of times they meet out here at the EOC. If something happens at the EOC, we need to make sure that they have a place where they can get together and discuss the missions and the functions that we have to complete. And we continuously do training exercise so that they always know the latest and greatest plans. This past November, we actually were able to exercise our continuity of operations and move to our alternate facility. And for this one, we kind of did it on a small low key just to make sure all of our connectivity and the facilities was ready to go 100%. So it was just emergency management, information technology, and facilities. And we went in and we tried to configure, make sure that all of our phones were working, the internet was working, making sure that if we needed to get the information out, we could do that, making sure the facility was good to go. And it was a quick snapshot, but it gives us that continuation of planning and making sure that we know exactly what we need to do the moment we walk in the door. IT knows exactly what needs to be hooked up when we walk in the door, and facilities is there always to provide us support for whatever is needed. One of the main concepts is looking at the whole community response and recovery, and ultimately it leads to community resilience. We cannot do it alone. Businesses cannot do it alone. Nonprofits cannot do it alone. So we have to look at it ultimately together, plan, respond, recover together. And we look at our community lifelines, our critical infrastructure. 80% of critical infrastructure is actually owned by the private sector. So without them, our critical infrastructure would be lost. We look at safety and security. A lot of times that's a lot of government. When we do our continuity of operations, we look at things like first responders. There's never a day we can go without first responders. So ultimately, we have to have them constantly. Food, water, and shelter. The people of the community always need food, water, and shelter. Health and medical, power, communications, transportation, hazardous materials, making sure that all things are in place so that if there is a disruption, we get them back online as quick as possible, and that continuum of information flows constantly. Councilwoman Wheeler touched on this a little bit, that 40% of businesses do not reopen after a disaster. 25% fail within a year, and 90% fail within 2 years. So it's really, really important that we actually get together, work through this, create that partnership so that the business community is always in the know of information. We can help design continuity plans. We can provide continuity training, and we can actually provide exercises for anyone who's interested in exercises. We here at the county are truly ready and willing to do anything that's necessary to make sure our business partners are ready for any type of disaster. And if you have any questions, I'd like to thank you.
Thank you so much, Aubrey. So as you can see from Aubrey's presentation and the comments and welcome provided by Councilmember Wheeler, the importance of our local businesses in the recovery of our community is vital, from getting your staff and your business up and running for your livelihood, for helping other businesses as well, and then working with the county to provide services to our community as a whole. So with that, I want to thank you so much for being here today to learn how you can protect your business, your livelihood, and your dream. So I'm going to introduce now Robert Preininger. He is with Business Survival Partners, which he opened in 2010 after historic floods in Tennessee to help make the region safer, and a more resilient place to do business and raise their family. Rob is a Disaster Recovery Institute International Certified Business Continuity Professional with over 20 years of resilience-related experience. He is committed to helping companies build and deploy high availability networks, data centers, and continuity programs that protect people, brand value, and drive earnings. So with that, Robert.
Thank you, Tara.
Aubrey, can you close down your screen? Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, good, it worked.
Can you all see my screen?
Not yet.
Oh, okay, here, share screen. We'll get this technology going here. There, how about that?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Trying to get my laser pointer here. Boom, there we go. Okay, thank you, Tara, Councilmember Wheeler, and also Aubrey, for what you and your team do to help keep Volusia County resilient and strong. So I appreciate that, and thanks for the intro. And thank you all for inviting me to join you here this morning. Let me get one more thing. There. Okay, let's get started. Well, every day, business continuity plans are used to save lives, livelihoods, and the futures of companies worldwide. So as was mentioned, learning how and why will give you the confidence to build and to trust in your own plan, one that works when you need it, but also that'll make a positive difference in the lives of everyone it touches in good times or bad. And this is important because after any disaster, through no fault of their own, employees at all corporate levels find themselves laid off, furloughed, or left to fend for themselves because the company was unprepared. So this in turn can make fear, uncertainty, and doubt some of the greatest threats to an organization and its workforce. That poses the question, what can be done to restore a sense of confidence, balance, hope in our lives, and also in the lives of those we work with? Well, that's the focus of our time today. And we'll be working on finding answers to how to avoid problems, and also what can be done when bad things happen to good companies and good people. As Tara had already gone over some of my background, that's enough about me. We'll go ahead and get started. So be ready to take notes as we move through today's content, and we'll have about 5 or 10 minutes or so available at the end for a Q&A. So please save your questions until that end or until we're wrapped up. And then any questions we can't get to today, please send an email and then we'll get you a reply. So today, we're going to cover you don't need it till you do, emergency stages, the risk assessment and the BIA or the business impact analysis, as it's commonly called, the shift to resiliency. So we'll start talking about some of where the answers live. And then finally, resources. So I'd just like to start off by putting everyone's mind at ease. I'm not here to tell you how to do your job or how to run your business. You're the experts. By sharing today's topic with you, I'm hoping that there's something of value that you can leave with that will help contribute to you and your company's continued growth and success. So having a business continuity program removes uncertainty from the unknown. It empowers everyone in the company with the tools, training, and also the confidence to make good decisions in bad situations. So if you think about it, the unexpected happens in all of our lives every day. The babysitter cancels, the family car breaks down, a loved one gets sick. Well, this is the same for your businesses. A strategic client jumps ship to a competitor, a key supplier goes into receivership and they unexpectedly shut down, or a global pandemic comes to your city. But why does this matter? What makes being prepared so important? Well, besides the statistics on this slide, this is one area of life and in business where what you don't know can and will hurt you if you are not prepared. So I often hear a statement that goes something like this: well, all my data is backed up in the cloud. Is all this extra effort really necessary? Well, enterprise risk is not just technology related, as you all know. Active threats, failure events, and downtime come in all sizes and degrees of magnitude. And not everything that can take a company down is a fire in this data center or a crater where the office used to be. A mishandled PR event can be just as damaging to earnings as a direct hit from a hurricane. And the loss potential, it echoes without saying. Confidence in leadership team, employer liability claims, even on a personal level, it can negatively affect the trajectory of a career or a business in that case. But however, the good news is the list on this slide is also an example of the rewards of having a plan ready and trained, doing the right thing for the right reason, and doing it at the right time. So every employee has a right to expect that they will be safe when they go to work. However, even the best intentioned company, meeting all of its duty of care responsibilities, can still witness violence within its walls or experience a natural or man-made disaster. It's an inherent risk of living in a free and open society in a fallen world. So what can individuals and organizations do to increase the safety of where we work? Well, part of the answer is attending ongoing training like you are today. And the other part is implementing a business continuity program. Duty of care obligations require company directors and officers to act in a competent manner and to make decisions that they believe are in the good faith and in the best interests of all their stakeholders. So having a continuity program helps executive leadership identify and reduce threats to employee safety and business operations if, God forbid, something bad should happen. No company wants to survive the disaster but lose what's left to post-event litigation. An act of God defense is not where anyone wants to hang their legal hat after an event. A better approach is to demonstrate appropriate due diligence in the day-to-day operations by having your business continuity program built, active, and trained. Risky blind spots can develop when risk forecasting and management are allowed to fade into the background. This potentially seduces boards and officers into viewing such considerations as unimportant or irrelevant. That'll never happen here, right? Famous last words. However, if unaddressed, when things do go wrong, these blind spots will contribute to their own set of cascading failures that can accelerate a crisis and even push a company into a slow motion death spiral. In postmortems of disaster-related business failures, the following 3 blind spots are at the top of every list of how and why the business had to tap out. First is weak decision-making authority. Whatever the underlying causes were, the organization just was not able to make the right decisions quick enough to help pull it out of its troubles. Next, poor communications. These are gaps in processes in both the emergency communications. This would be the tools or the modalities, the systems that are used to push out the message to all the stakeholders, as well as crisis communications, which is the actual message content, what you're saying about the situation that you're experiencing. And both of those, unfortunately, lead to ad hoc reactions. This forces a company to be shooting from the lip and from the hip in reacting to whatever's happening. There's just no plans in place, and nobody's really aware of what needs to be done and how to do it. We're going to do our best to help you avoid these. And one of the ways to avoid these risky blind spots is to use accepted standards for guidance when building a business continuity program, or any program for that matter. It reduces the time needed to implement the program. It provides objective content and context for reference. And it also helps demonstrate appropriate rigor in the program development process, should there be any legal questions after the event. So this slide provides only a handful of options, but the key takeaway is this: to be successful, it's important that you apply a standard that fits your business model and corporate culture, aligns with your regulatory environment, and supports what is already in place and works for your organization. Following this approach keeps the board and the executive leadership aware of its risk governance responsibilities and will result in a documented governance program that is process-enabled, the how-tos are there, and it's auditable. It's the best of all worlds. So what can we expect when a potential threat becomes a reality? Well, some events will produce an empirically verifiable impact. That is, we can see, we can taste, we can touch the damage that it produced. Other disruptive events, well, they have what's called a softer impact. They're not seen. They happen in the back alleys of cyberspace or the innermost parts of a human's body, but their damage can be just as devastating to a company's survival as a hurricane. So regardless of the source of impact, every crisis-afflicted company moves through 3 stages of emergency-related activities. And these stages are, first, the response stage. There's a clear and present danger, and it's actively in play. So you are responding to that danger. Once the danger is passed, the organization shifts into the restoration stage. This is focused on bringing back online the lost capabilities or capacities that the company does not have access to because of whatever their crisis event was. And finally is the recovery stage. This is returning back to normal or the new normal, as the case may be, depending on the extent of the crisis that afflicted the company. So these are important to keep track of at all stages of your business continuity, applying your business continuity program. So let's take a closer look at each stage just to learn a little bit more. So the response stage, threat is active, as we had mentioned. Your people, places, and things are stressed in some way, are threatened, requires immediate action. Your incident response team, your emergency management team, third-party support of individuals or companies, as well as community coordination and definitely communications. So the flow of the engagement model works something like this. The disruptive event occurs. First, it's detected, and so it's important to have capabilities and awareness training within your organization so people know what to do when they see something. This gives your emergency response teams the ability to mobilize, to be able to start gathering situational awareness so now they can assess what has just happened to the organization, so they can ultimately create a strategy and a plan that can be implemented to respond. So now we move into the response stage. The disruptive event this starts the danger is past. Okay, so whatever was immediately threatening everyone is gone. And now the emergency first responders, they've left the site. Your emergency management team takes over control of the situation. And now the focus becomes who's been hurt? Are there any fatalities? Start to develop situational awareness. What has been lost? What emergency level are you operating at? And the appropriate continuity plans and communications plans are being activated and actively applied. So finally, capabilities and capacities are at near to or at 100%. You're ready to return to pre-event levels of activity within the organization. So you're not just focused on barely keeping the lights on or doing the minimum operating levels for getting invoices out and personnel engaged. You're ready to go back to business. So notification of all stakeholders occurs at this time. And then last but not least, shortly after the full restart, you want to conduct an after action report. It's very important to review what has happened, what went well, what might not have gone so good, and to give the organization the ability to implement important lessons that were learned and to update its documentation and training for the future. So let's talk about the risk assessment and the BIA, the business impact analysis. What are these things? Well, every organization needs to understand its operational risks to be able to achieve the resiliency and availability goals. It's kind of like the old project management saying, how can you manage what doesn't get measured? Well, it's the same thing here in the context of cause and effect. So let's take a moment to explore three key elements that comprise this thing called risk. First, there needs to be significant assets or areas, and they need to be identified. So these would be found in your people, your places, or things that you rely on to be successful. Next, are these significant assets and areas threatened in some way? The cause of an event can come from one source category or a combination of categories. And the source categories are what you see up on the slide here. They're natural, man-made, or technological in their source. And then the last element in our formula here, our risk formula, is are these significant assets and areas vulnerable to those threats in some way? So where are we vulnerable? There's important questions to ask your organization. Is it our systems or people who are dependent on, or our vendors or suppliers? And what are we vulnerable to? Are we vulnerable to an active threat, some type of a failure event or downtime? So if all three elements are present, there is a risk that should be explored further. Why? Well, not all risks are created equal. However, most tend to follow recognizable patterns, so plans can be made to avoid or mitigate their impact. So how do we objectively measure or score the risk that's being examined? Most plans that you'll run across will use a numerical scale of 1 to 3 or 1 to 5. There's nothing wrong with that. Personally, I encourage the use of a numerical scale of 1 to 10 for scoring risks. But whatever measurement scale you use, the inquiry process looks for answers to what can go wrong, how likely is it to occur, the probability, and last, if it doesn't happen, are there consequences? So please keep in mind, this is not a measure of good versus bad or one thing being more important than another. The goal is to objectively identify where the most vulnerable and time-sensitive business operations are, so your company can make investments to protect them or to prioritize the recovery in a crisis. So where do we start our risk discovery efforts? Great question. Well, my encouragement to you is to start in the 5 areas on this slide. This approach will provide you with a good overview of your company's risk universe. And the risk areas are external risks. So these are risks that would threaten your organization from outside of your organization, of course, external. But then the focus turns back inward. So you look at your risks in the facility that you're at, as well as other facilities at your organization, within your organization's business ecosystem. The voice and data technologies that you rely on, extremely important. Departmental risks. These are threats to critical business functions or processes at the department level. And last but not least, at the production floor, the desktop, the work area risks. So again, if there are significant assets and areas that are vulnerable to particular threats, there is a risk that that you do want to explore further to see just what the potential impact, how bad the potential impact is, and how probable it is, or how likely that threat may happen. So remember when you took a test in school, your work was first scored and then assigned a grade based on that score. Well, the same concept here. I believe that defined guidance is a critical component of success in risk scoring, but it's often inadvertently overlooked during the process. So by sharing with your department leaders how a risk score will be defined, you can be confident that the data that you collect from the boiler room on up to the boardroom used a common frame of reference in giving you the information, or providing the information for the business impact analyses. So other key benefits are some of the ones that are on the screen here. Develops a common risk-based language throughout the organization. Probably my favorite is that it negates opinion-based resistance within your company. It's tough enough to get through this process without others saying, well, I don't think that it should be that, or I don't feel that that's quite right, or it doesn't seem to me like, well, no, we have a objective standard. Here's the numbers. Here's how you can measure or score your risks. And it just makes life a lot easier for everyone in the process. It's also used to assign tier levels. This helps in your recovery as well as your pre-event readiness. And it supports objective decision-making. So choices that are made by the executive leadership are risk-informed, not risk-based. So disruptive events can have a widespread impact on a company, as we all know. This is why it is mission critical to ensure that the business does not have gaps or surprises in its overall BCM or DR program. Now, while there are numerous areas to focus on when conducting your risk assessment and ultimately the business impact analysis, the Disaster Recovery Institute International, DRII, they identify the following areas of impact as worthy of primary consideration. This is where you'd like to start. Take a look at your human impact. What's going to happen to your peeps? Operational impact, of course. Your GRC, or your governance, risk, and compliance impacts, regulatory impacts. Critical importance, your financial impact, your customer impact, and last but not least, your brand value or your reputational impact. Let's talk about classifying these failure events and downtime. The classification levels will start from the bottom of the slide, low impact, and moving up in severity as we go up higher in the slide. And classification levels, they are used to quickly communicate the scope of an event, just how bad capabilities and capacities have been afflicted or affected. You will see various definitions used in other plans. However, these are the ones I rely on. And we started with a hazard, and which can snowball into a vulnerability. So these are short-term, low-impact events that can escalate if they're not properly addressed. So unattended hazards can grow into a vulnerability. Think of maybe a cord, something very simple, a cord that has a nick in it. And it's not really a vulnerability per se, it's just a hazard. It could short out, it could cause a fire, other negative things. But if that crack in a cord gets bigger, or there's water in the same vicinity, it could cause an electrical short, maybe it's cause a fire. And now that hazard that grew into a vulnerability could turn itself into a disruption. So this generally requires a commitment of some resources, time, and focus by the company. But the good news is, at this stage, it's limited in scope and scale. Overall business operations generally remain unaffected, and business as usual can still occur. But do consider dividing this classification into two subcategories, a temporary disruption and a short-term disruption. Both will be defined by your BIA process, can be defined by your BIA process. And it's important to get your arms around what impact a disruption would have on the organization, because that gives you the ability to determine if you're dealing with an emergency. So this is a disruption or a pending disruption that's increasing in size, severity, scope, or speed, but it could also be a flash event that requires immediate mobilization of the incident response team to assess and respond to the event, especially if injuries or death have occurred. So an emergency generally will result in operational constraints because the impact level requires an immediate commitment of resources, time, and corporate focus with little or no warning. Next is a disaster. So generally, disaster will require most, if not all, business operations to be suspended for appropriate safety reasons. Also because it exceeds multiple recovery time objectives. For those of you who aren't familiar with those, we'll touch base on that in a couple of slides. But it will also, it's also indicative of there being an impact to multiple departments and or critical business functions. So it's not an isolated event per se. It tends to have broader reach within the organization and affect you on many levels. A disaster results in constraints of loss and restrictions, and it generally will exceed a company's capacity to respond at that point in time. So it's not so much the organization not knowing what to do, but they don't have the capacity to do it. We don't have the people, the money, the time, the trucks, whatever that need is demanding of the organization. There's a capacity gap that's feeding into this disaster. And last, what we all want to stay away from is the catastrophes. Characteristics of a catastrophe include open-ended recovery times and open-ended costs. We're not sure when this is going to be resolved and when we're going to stop writing checks, right? It'll blow past maximum tolerable downtimes, which again is another key performance indicator we'll talk about here in a little bit. And worst of all, it eclipses the company's capability to respond. So it's more than a capacity issue now. We just don't know what to do. So think of the city of New Orleans, perhaps with Katrina, just for an example comes to mind. So, we've arrived at the audience participation segment of our program. So I have a $25 gift card from Panera for the first person with the correct answer to what is inside this box. So it's not a riddle, so you don't have to worry, you will get a clue. Type your answer into the chat bar for your shot at the gift card. And the clue for today's what's in the box is, drum roll please, what is the greatest danger that's lurking in any crisis event? So it's a flat level across all crisis events. There is a common thread or a common danger that's interwoven into every crisis event. So Tara, are you able to
I am
jump in
here.
here and
Yep. So
Okay.
if you could put your answer in the chat box, and we will see who has the right answer for a $25 gift card for Panera.
oh, this is so exciting.
So Myra wrote in natural disaster.
Okay, you're on the right track. But we're looking for something that would be common in all of the disasters. So maybe in a technological or a man-made event as well. I'll give a clue. How about, let's see, what, birds, swans. Have any of you had any, heard anything describing events that dealt with a certain colored swan, a black swan, if you will? Does that help? Okay, I've got another one for you. How about it's common also in anniversaries and birthday parties? How about that? Not that they qualify as a disaster or a catastrophe, hopefully not, but this element is the same. Anybody? Come on, there's got to be some guesses out there. Okay, we'll give it another couple seconds.
So that was a really good clue. Some people, so you're getting close. You're getting close. The answer is balloon. You're getting close. Some people don't like them.
That's good. Oh yeah, there you go. That's good. Well,
And they jump up and
looks
say
like-
it sometimes. Let's just do that one. There you go.
do we have a winner?
Yes, yes. Mira wrote surprise. So yes, she got
That's
it.
it.
Thank
Dun,
you.
dun, dun, dun. Oh wait, what's going on?
So Mira, if you want to personal message Michelle Chakowski in the chat with your email address, she will connect you with Robert to get your gift card.
And the winner's name again was, just so I can make a note of that?
Myra
Myra?
Estevez.
Okay. Well, thank you all for participating and congratulations to our winner, Myra. Well done, Myra. Okay, so back to the topic at hand. Well, as we've discussed, a risk assessment identifies significant assets and qualifies or measures threats and vulnerabilities within the company's risk universe. The business impact analysis, or what's commonly referred to as the BIA, then will quantify those same risks from a business impact and process loss side. So in other words, what is the cost penalty in lost time, scope, resources, and ultimately dollars? So here's an easy way to remember the focus of a BIA. Its primary objective is to identify the impact and potential losses to your company if any department or business function is unavailable for any reason. Okay, and the for any reason part is important because it speaks to what's called an all hazards methodology. In your business continuity plan, I encourage you when you first start putting it together or get to updating and refreshing it, is to run it through the filter of all hazards. And what that means is, well, specifically in the context of a business impact analysis, that process it's not a mitigation or a continuity strategy building effort. It's not looking to find the answers. Therefore, it's not too concerned about the cause, just the effect on the company if any department or business function is unavailable. So for business continuity management, DR planning, you'll use the risk assessment to qualify the full scope of threats, vulnerabilities, and their probabilities. Also your assets, what assets are we looking to protect? And then hot wash that with the business impact analysis to quantify potential losses and establish critical timeframes. And in the context of building your continuity program, all hazards methodology gives you the framework to be able to respond to any event. So say, for example, if you learn how to get out of your building, right, and practice your evacuation procedures really well, and your communications and your assessing the event so you have a fast response. What that does is if you have to get out of the building because there's a chemical release, a potential hurricane coming, a fire in a car in the parking lot, it doesn't matter what the cause is for having to get out of the building. You all just know how to get out of the building and get out of there well. So that's the thought process behind the all hazards. So the process flow, back to the business impact analyses, reads from left to right in figure 5.0 on our screen here. Excuse me. So first you're collecting your raw source data. So just the raw data from your information systems, your business unit functions, business unit processes are significant assets and areas, right? Next, that raw source data then is analyzed through the business impact analysis process, and it's refined into actionable information. So now you can start doing something with that raw data. And then through the process, once the reports are created that are pushed up through the organization through the BIA report, that risk intelligence or becomes risk intelligence, the actionable information becomes risk intelligence that the company can then use to make strategies to protect the organization and or to effectively respond should something happen. So again, just to summarize that before I leave that slide, data is harvested. You will perform a data analysis and classify that data, refine it into actionable information, validate your results, and then report on your findings. So every department has business functions that are made up of systems and supporting tasks. So to understand the full impact of a department or a critical function being unavailable, we need to include dependencies. So these are what your department needs to operate and what others are looking to receive from your department for their success. To help you understand the dependencies of your department's business functions, you want to ask your department directors to review what each department function depends on from its systems. So what systems does that function need? Are there specific vendors or suppliers that critical function needs? And are you dependent on any other departments within the company or external companies in some key way? So this data set helps your company assess how a dependency in your department could have a negative upstream or downstream impact on the company's operations or its recovery efforts. So KPIs, or key performance indicators. That common risk-based language we touched on a little bit earlier helps avoid confusion and also helps accurately profile risks to the company that have the highest impact and potential to occur. So this information then will guide the creation of continuity and risk management strategies. When it's used in pre-event readiness, a common risk-based language effectively conveys functional requirements, technical requirements, as well as risk management priorities at all operational levels. So these are just a handful of important risk and restoration KPIs, and is by all means not the be all to end all into the measures that you want to apply to your risks. So first is something called a minimum operating level. So these are the minimum levels that you need just to function. What's needed to keep the lights on, keep the key individuals productive, invoices can still go out, and ultimately keep the lights on. So how do you stay afloat? The minimum operating levels. What do you need to stay afloat? Next is your recovery time objectives. So this is the maximum time of unavailability, and you want to have this measured so you have an idea of what aspects of your organization need to be prioritized when you move into the restoration stage. So recovery time objective. Recovery point objective is the maximum level of acceptable data loss. So how much data could you lose before it becomes a liability for the organization, whether it's legally or reputationally. And then maximum tolerable downtime. So this identifies the catastrophic level of downtime for the organization. It's beyond the recovery time objective, and it's the maximum amount of time that you can be without X, whatever it is that you're measuring. So now there's some who still will ask, well, is all this really necessary? Well, truth is, business interruptions are not static events. The old saying, time is money, is never truer than when preparing budgets to mitigate potential risks or when responding to the reality of a failure event or downtime. Availability comes at a cost, but so does unavailability. So the closer that availability gets to zero downtime, the higher the initial investment becomes. Wheelbarrows full of money, right? However, Zeros can be added to downtime costs at an alarming rate the longer it takes to restore and recover operations. Could wind up needing dump trucks full as the minutes turn into hours and days and weeks. So it's a delicate balancing act, to be sure. And this is why accurate KPIs are the foundation for improved executive decision-making, accurate budget allocations, and for protecting the equity position of all your company stakeholders. So let's shift our focus now to resiliency, to the continuity part of the equation. So we've talked about resiliency and availability, but what exactly do we mean? Well, these terms may sound interchangeable, but they do have entirely different meanings and applications, and they need to be properly accounted for in your continuity plans. The dictionary definition of resiliency speaks to something's ability to return to its original shape or to bounce back from a stress. And also in the world of continuity, this is attained by a system's design or its support process. So for example, by reducing potential points of failure through its design, the system inherently becomes more resilient. So the example, the line drawing there on the left, is a power delivery system for a data center, for a highly resilient data center. Everything's duplicated. There's two generators up here. There's dual power feeds into the whole building. There's two battery backups here, two battery sources for those battery backups. And the load to your IT load, to your servers, can be switched over at any point in time. Very resilient. Let's talk about that same thing as far as our data, right? We want to be able to get our important information, right? So this sample topography, we have backups, local backups, cross-town backups, cloud backups, backup to backup on the cloud, and tape backup. So this is a very resilient data backup design. And we have a new couple that have a baby on the way. And their old family car that was handed down and extremely important in the initial parts of their relationship just really isn't cutting it right now. So they invest in a new car to give them that added resiliency and reliability in their lives. They get the keys and they're happy as well. So the whole picture looks quite well, but availability now comes into play. So on the other hand, this speaks to how the system is maintained or supported by processes that make that system available when it's needed. Okay, so it's not necessarily the capabilities of the system, it's your ability to use it. Is it available? So in this example here, starting in the upper right, with a young couple with a new car, they have two keys, but both keys are on the same key ring. So there's not very much redundancy or potential capability to keep access to that car if that one ring is gone. So if their systems and processes are in place to add a little more redundancy in the availability of the key in that process, and that's this example, they will lose access to that highly resilient car. Next, back at our topography here for our data backup, if all of the passwords are managed by a single administrative person, doesn't matter how resilient the design of that data backup system is, if you can't access that data, it too will not be available to you when you need it. And last but not least, our data center design. Highly resilient, but if the generators aren't exercised, if the diesel fuel isn't mixed up, so it doesn't get all gummy and gluey, if the battery UPSs aren't maintained properly and the batteries that support them aren't, this highly resilient data center power system will not be available for that data center when it's needed. So all of this to say, remember to address both the resiliency and the availability needs of your most vulnerable and time-sensitive operations in your business continuity strategy development. So while few business continuity laws are on the books, there is a growing body of legal precedent that speaks to the fiduciary obligations of board members and corporate officers to prepare their organization for reasonable and foreseeable threats. So disaster avoidance as a corporate strategy will occur at 3 levels. First is the policy level, very strategic in nature. Next, it gets pushed down to the management level to be applied, it's tactical. And then ultimately at the operational level, the policies are applied and the how-tos are added, they become process enabled. So at each level, continuity or risk management strategies can be applied to help ensure the success of your operations and the safety of your workforce. So we've defined our risks. We've discussed where they potentially can live and how to go about finding them. And what do we do with them once we find these things? Well, because all risks are not created equal, different decision-making strategies will fit at different times and for various reasons. However, all strategies will fit into 4 basic risk management categories. And those are, first, that risk can be avoided. Whatever options are being evaluated, you just don't do them. That merger and acquisition may look great on the balance sheet, but if it brings expensive risk exposures, don't go there. Legacy software, some old system that you can't secure, say Windows 7, for example. Sometimes it's better to avoid that risk and just retire the system, make that new investment and replace it with a securable operating system. So avoid the risk. Next approach is to mitigate that risk somehow. I like to come at it from 2 different angles, reducing and containing strategies. Reducing the risk involves putting controls in place that will lower the likelihood of that threat happening. So an example from our pandemic is wearing a mask to reduce the potential of getting or giving the virus. Another risk reducing strategy would be to stay at home or to work from home. So an example of a containment strategy, again using the pandemic for an example, would be to quarantine at home if a person was potentially exposed to the virus. And then for someone who has become infected, a different risk containment strategy would be to enter isolation at home to avoid spreading the virus to others in that house or to coworkers at the office. So risk mitigation as a strategy. Next is transferring the risk. So the first example comes to most people's minds is insurance, and that is a good example of how this strategy can be applied. Another example can be outsourcing that risk to an entity that's better equipped to handle it. Okay, so for example, say we're a laboratory, we process non-radioactive samples, but we get the opportunity to close a large contract that includes, unfortunately, handling a small percentage of radioactive material, not our wheelhouse. But what we can do, instead of using the avoidance strategy and turning down the contract, is we can enter into strategic partnership with a company that is qualified to handle radioactive material, transfer the risk to them, and everybody wins. And last, we may have to just accept the risk. Some aspects of doing business involve inherent or residual risks that are just too costly to effectively address. And acceptance is the only meaningful approach available. I would just like to encourage all of you to not take a 5th approach that's not spoken of, and that is to ignore the risk. And I don't think that's any of your strategies, given the fact that you're here on this call today. So I commend your commitment to the resiliency and availability of your organization. So let's review what we've covered so far. We have 3 phases of emergency-related activities. First is our response stage, active danger or disruption. It requires our immediate focus, some level. Next is the restoration phase. Danger's past, and now we can start looking at restoring lost capabilities and capacities, first to minimum operating levels, right? So people can be productive, invoices can still be generated, and the lights can stay on. And last is the recovery phase. We're able to return to at or near full capabilities and capacities, back to our normal or the new normal, depending on what's happened. We also discussed the danger of risky blind spots, the importance of using industry standards when creating our continuity plans. So in each of these 3 emergency phases, we need to avoid those blind spots, performance gaps, and surprises to have any hope of saving lives in the company's future. So it's been my experience that all standards in the context of continuity planning share 3 problem-solving fundamentals at their core. And when these fundamentals are in place, the organizational blind spots begin to fade and clarity starts to take over. So the first of these 3 steps in building a resilient or available organization is to establish decision-making authority, your command and control. There has to be someone or a group of someone's in charge of assessing the threat, strategy development, and rolling out the response strategy or the response plan. Those of you with smaller organizations, don't let this throw you. It doesn't matter if it's 1 person or 100 people involved in this process. The important part is you need to have someone with the ability to understand the situation and to make executive level calls that commit your organization's time, resources, and money. Next are communications. The decision-making authority, whoever that individual or group is, has to be able to communicate to have any hope of gathering situational awareness and to coordinate successful outcomes. And this includes both the emergency communications, your systems and modalities that you use, as well as the message that's being conveyed over those systems, crisis communications. And the third step is coordinated response capabilities. Someone needs to be ready, willing, and able, and that means trained, to be able to implement the response plans. These are your tactical support teams. They're the tip of the spear, if you will, that's responsible for successful implementation of any strategy that you come up with. So let's take a quick and closer look at each step. This sample framework for your emergency management team. Depending on the size of your organization, you may have 1 people or 2 people that wear many hats. But again, as I just mentioned, regardless of the structure, the important takeaway is to have this strategic capability in place prior to any event occurring and before progressing any further in developing your business continuity program. So this is the first place to start. This is important because once a disruptive event occurs, your organization needs to be ready to engage that event and manage to the level of need in the moment that it happens. So what you have when it happens is what you have to work with, fortunately or unfortunately, as the case may be. So time will be of the essence. And this is why pre-planning and training saves lives, avoids career-defining moments, and can help any company avoid disaster. So in order to properly engage any disruptive event, the emergency management team needs to be in place and trained and ready to, as we had mentioned once earlier, to detect and be able to communicate what has happened to the incident response or the emergency management team so they can get mobilized to gather situational awareness, to understand what you're dealing with, and to build a proper response to that threat that has now become a reality. Here's an example of an engagement flow that you could use. It's an if-then decision tree. And I encourage each of you, when you do start your plan development effort, start it by building flow charts for whatever it is that you're examining, a specific task or process or procedure. The visual maps will make it a lot easier for you to gather the information, but also to apply it when a disaster occurs or when a disruptive event occurs. It's much easier than reading a Word document, especially for someone who's not familiar with the task at hand. So there are many different applications that are available to support these efforts. I use Lucid charts. They're based in Utah. Their user interface is easy to use and intuitive, but the flow is your standard if-then flow. If this happens, do we do this? Do we go this way or do we go another way? Gather more information. If then, yes, is there, in this case, our example, personnel in immediate danger? Let's escalate this to the highest level, or we're not sure, undetermined, any other risk factors in play? Yes, no, and then ultimately to some level of decision, whether it's an immediate emergency response or a lower level response. So the engagement flow on this slide outlines an all hazards approach to your team's thinking through what we're going to do, is what our response is going to be. Oops. Sorry. I have an animation issue there. Okay, here we go. So this, the incident response deals with what you're doing in the response stage. Okay, how do we develop our response? Obviously, you want to have incident-specific plans created for probability and high impact events that were identified in your BIA. So for example, a hurricane, you would want to have a specific hurricane plan, but your all hazards approach will cover you in all these areas, including the hurricane. The incident response actions, first and foremost, intended to protect and preserve human life, maintain critical business capabilities and capacities, and also focus on limiting damage to company assets. So the response flow that we have here, and this will be in your in the slide deck that you can download later, will help you in determining a course of action once the threat has been detected and the team has been mobilized. First, you need to understand the threat. Okay, just what the heck are we dealing with? Next, we build our response strategy. You need to communicate that strategy so we can implement that strategy. And ultimately, once the danger is passed, we can then safely move to step 5 at the very bottom here and transition operational focus to restoration phase activity. So in closing, the incident response plan will provide your team a flexible set of guidelines to make effective problem-solving decisions under a fast-moving, uncertain, and difficult circumstance. But it needs to be developed and practiced and maintained to be effective when you need it. So communications, found it helpful to present this in 2 stages or 2 different categories, just because it's too important not to get right. So communications is key to saving lives and makes everything in your plan work. So first, here's a framework that you can use, and we'll touch on the 2 different forms of communications, the emergency communications and crisis in just a second. But this framework is something you can use when constructing any emergency communications plan. It's built on an acronym called PACE, or P-A-C-E, spelled P-A-C-E. And it stands for your primary communications tools that you're using. The A is for alternate, so the P-A-C-E. So we got primary, alternate. C is your contingency, your tertiary, if you're familiar with that term, the 3rd level. And ultimately your emergency. All bets are off, and we just need to get the word out. So this example is from a bomb threat program slide, but it applies to any emergency communications plan. So look to build in as much redundancy and resiliency as you can. And actually, this speaks to the heart of availability. If you notice, the PACE, we're always looking to have, what do we need to be able to have our communications capabilities available to us, right? So this is also, you can be confident you can stay connected regardless of circumstances. So the 2 types of communications are emergency communications. These are the how-tos of communicating, your systems and modalities. And your crisis communications, your message management, what is being said and how it's being said, and who is saying it, right, for that matter. So if you are not controlling the narrative of your crisis, it's a safe bet that others will do it for you, and you will not like the results. So constant 2-way communications with a human tone, include all your stakeholders. And this is a presentation all in and of itself. But just so you're aware of, you have 2 different forms of communications. Is key moving forward. Let's take a real close short look at each one of these. So the communications process would include what to do when you see something, how to do it, when it needs to be done, who needs to be contacted, okay, and what their potential response and next step responsibilities are. You can take the form of a flow chart like this. But also, if you notice, in this flow chart, what's missing is the how-tos. Okay, so the how-tos always want to be there. It's a special number that we need to dial. Do we know what the number is? Do we need to do something else that's specific, like overhead paging, say for the image that we have on this slide? Does this person know who to talk to get help for this coworker of theirs? So one last thought, be sure Everyone in the company knows what to do and how to do it. That's the key takeaway from this. Anyone can become an initial responder at any given point in time. From a crisis communication standpoint, in today's always-on media-driven world, you need to be prepared to control what's being said about your company. The crisis communications plan, it's the process used to deliver what is said, and its additional benefit to having a crisis communications plan is that it serves as a guide to executive leadership on their role in this process and helps them avoid making a bad situation worse with self-defeating behaviors or messaging. This is all because in a crisis, all stakeholders will expect three things from the crisis-afflicted organization. And what everyone is looking for is for that organization to act responsibly. They're looking for it to be truthful at all times. Yes, that does still matter. And that it holds itself accountable. So this is why it's so important to have a trained spokesperson or team ready to provide thoughtful, positive responses to questions as they occur. Keeping the record straight and controlling the narrative of events is essential to preserving your company's reputation and will give it a measure of control over its destiny as the events unfold. Emergency contact lists can take many shapes and forms. Just want to stress that it's important that you have you maintain accurate, accessible, and secure emergency contact lists. They will contain company classified information, so they need to be secured. Coordinated response is the third step. So your organization's emergency actions be handled by the incident response team. This is just a sample layout or a sample framework. Yours will look different, of course, but regardless of the number of members or their assigned roles, the mission is straightforward. You always want to provide for the safety and welfare of all your employees and personnel on site. And one example for your tactical missions teams, the specialty teams for specialty with special focuses. These are teams that will roll up under the incident response team, but they are, again, the hands and feet for that organization. They have a special mission. So the example that's on here, up on the screen here for you, is a crisis communications team, just to give you an idea. And regardless of the team's mission, it's not the number of individuals that are available that is important, but that the support role they provide is accounted for in your continuity program in a meaningful way. So as we draw to a close, I'd just like to remind everyone that no matter what phase of an emergency you're in, it's imperative to maintain a constant feedback loop between the incident response team and the emergency management team. Because the crisis events are not static, that means they're changing constantly. It's very important for the workforce safety and your company's survival to remain connected and agile. In this way, adjustments can be made quickly and communicated as events unfold. Let's take a quick stroll through resources here. This is a great publication by FEMA. And I encourage the use of this resource to all my clients because it's a natural behavioral tendency to take care of one's own family first in a crisis, right? It holds true even for emergency first responders. So without your people, there's very little hope of recovering the business, no matter how committed your workforce is to its success. So this resource provides you and your workforce with the checklists and forms needed to protect your families and their finances. So this is a great resource. It's only about, I think, about 10 pages long. And just Google the number or the publication number at the top of the slide here, and you'll be able to download your copy today. So get ready resources. There's a plethora of options that exist out in the world today, and the internet makes it very easy to get a hold of them. I would just like to speak to a handful here that are really important and great resources. CISA, or the Cyber and Security Infrastructure Security Agency, has a lot of great resources, especially in the context of cybersecurity. They make them very easy and accessible to small businesses. So it's a great resource to use for your family as well as a small business or a business of any size for that matter. FEMA has great resources at their website, fema.gov. It's a local resource, the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety that you have in Florida there, an outstanding organization that has a full program with the forms available for you to fill out. It's called Open for Business is the name of the program. It's been, I think it's been around for about 8 years or so, maybe a little bit more or less. And their website is up here on the screen for you as well. NFPA, a National Fire Prevention Association, as unintuitive as that may seem, they were one of the pioneers in establishing business continuity as a replicatable program where they actually had a system in place. So they have great resources as well. And the Red Cross, as you all know, is always a great place for assistance in an emergency for both a family and a business. And we do want to acknowledge and call out as a treasure trove of resources and support for your organizational success, the contributions of your state, regional, tribal, and local emergency management agencies. They are your go-to team, whether it's medical or operational or infrastructure needs. So it looks like we've hit our time. We've got a few minutes left for questions or to war game any ideas you have. Would anyone like to comment what might have been left out, or perhaps a topic that you would like to discuss further?
We currently have no questions in chat or the question and answer. I did want to let everyone know that this webinar training is being recorded and will be hosted on our website. So you will be able to have access to that and revisit the slides that Robert provided.
Want to give everybody just another minute or two, or you think we're good to wrap up?
If you guys, we have about a couple more minutes. So if you do have any questions or comments in the training, like Robert said, if there was something that you felt wasn't covered that you wanted an answer to, that would be great. Go ahead and throw that in there and maybe we could get to that. And again, I want to thank all of you for joining us today, as well as Aubrey from Volusia County Emergency Management and Councilmember Wheeler. Thank you so much for providing your perspective and welcoming us all today.
Yes, thank you all. And thank you, Tara and Michelle, for inviting me, as well as each of you for investing part of your day with us. Thank you.